What happens when the people who raised you decide you're expendable? When your own family treats you like a background character in your sister's fairy tale and then expects you to smile through it? This isn't a story about shouting matches or public drama. It's a story about quiet revenge, about what happens when someone realizes silence can cut deeper than words ever could. It all began on a day that was supposed to be perfect, the kind of day filled with roses, expensive perfume, and camera flashes. Her sister looked radiant, the kind of beauty that comes from being adored. Everyone laughed, clinked glasses, and circled around her like she was the sun. And in the corner, there she stood, the forgotten sibling. The one told to keep it simple. Don't bring anyone. Don't make a scene. At first, she thought it was just family logistics. Maybe they wanted to avoid confusion. But when she arrived and found her name missing from the guest list, when the coordinator blinked at her like she was a stranger, she realized this wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. She wasn't on the list. She wasn't on the seating chart. She wasn't even part of the family photos. She'd been erased. Her mother pretended to be busy. Her father avoided eye contact. Her sister smiled for the cameras like nothing was wrong. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter and luxury, she understood what her family had truly been saying for years. You don't belong here. Most people would have made a scene, demanded answers, but she didn't. She smiled, took a seat in the corner, and played along. Because the truth was, she already knew something they didn't, something that would turn this perfect wedding into a silent disaster. It all started 2 months earlier with a series of withdrawals from her trust fund. Small at first, nothing alarming, then bigger. Thousands disappearing under vague labels like family expense. At first, she assumed it was an accounting mistake. Her father managed the account after all, but curiosity turned to shock when she saw her sister's name attached to every transaction, dress, venue, deposit, photographer, everything. When she confronted them, they didn't deny it. They justified it. She's getting married, her mother said softly, with that guilt-laced tone manipulators love to use. You're single. You don't need it now. That's when she understood. Their loyalty was never to fairness, it was to appearances. So she didn't fight, didn't argue. She just listened, nodded, and planned. The next morning, she called the bank, reported the unauthorized transfers, and locked the account, quietly, efficiently. She recovered every cent, but that wasn't revenge. That was just self-preservation. The real revenge came in the form of silence. She didn't tell them. She let them believe they'd won. Let them plan a wedding on money that no longer existed. Let them post countdowns and talk about dream venues. And when the big day finally arrived, the day she stood in that corner, ignored and unwanted, she wasn't the victim anymore. She was the observer. Because what they didn't know was that every major vendor, the florist, the photographer, the venue was waiting on payments that had already bounced. And she knew exactly when those invoices were due. So as her sister twirled in her gown, smiling for pictures, reality was quietly catching up behind her. First, it was the photographer asking for payment before releasing any photos. Then the florist refusing to hand over the bouquets. Then the venue manager threatening to cut the power unless the balance was cleared immediately. It took 58 minutes for the entire illusion to collapse. Her mother's calls came first, then her father's, then her sisters panicked, desperate, one after another. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She sat by her window, watching the city lights shimmer below, and listened to her phone vibrate endlessly. Somewhere across town, the perfect family portrait was falling apart in real time. Her sister's makeup running, her mother crying, her father scrambling to fix what charm couldn't cover. And her, she finally felt peace. Because she'd learned the most powerful kind of revenge isn't loud, it's quiet. It's restraint. It's letting people taste the silence they forced on you. They built a life where she didn't exist. So she gave them a wedding without her financially, emotionally, completely. Sometimes the most satisfying sound in the world is nothing at all. They say revenge is best served cold, but what they don't tell you is that silence makes it colder. After that night, her family's world began to unravel. The fallout wasn't instant, it was slow, humiliating, and public. The kind of collapse you can't recover from with a few apologies or carefully written statements. The story spread fast. Vendors talked, guests whispered. Within a week, the wedding of the year became a cautionary tale about financial fraud and family betrayal. Her parents, once obsessed with appearances, found themselves dodging questions from their social circle. People wanted to know, how could something like that happen? How could a family so perfect, so polished, fall apart so publicly? And the truth? It wasn't just about money. It was about control. See, families like this don't operate on love. They operate on hierarchy. The golden child at the top, the scapegoat at the bottom, and the parents managing perception like it's a brand. The sister was the face of perfection. The narrator, the liability. The one who spoke up, the one who saw through the act. So when she exposed their manipulation not by shouting, but by letting consequences speak for themselves, it shattered everything they'd built. Her father tried to repair the damage first. He called banks, begged for extensions, even tried to guilt her into fixing what she'd done. But the truth was, she hadn't done anything illegal. Every transaction was documented, every withdrawal reversed, every move protected. He was fighting a ghost, a version of his daughter he thought was still desperate for approval. But she wasn't that person anymore. For the first time, she didn't respond to his anger, didn't fall for her mother's tears or her sister's dramatic apologies. Because when someone shows you how little you matter, believing their remorse becomes a form of self-harm. Instead, she focused on something her family never taught her, peace through detachment. She went back to her life quietly. No grand speech, no social media post, no satisfaction-seeking moment. Just silence. And that silence drove them insane. Because for people who thrive on control, nothing is more terrifying than being ignored. They sent long messages about forgiveness and moving on, carefully worded to sound noble, but they weren't asking for closure. They were asking for validation. They needed her to care, to react, to prove that their opinions still had power. But she didn't give them that. She didn't block them. She didn't reply. She just let the messages sit there, unread, like ghosts from a past life. And here's the thing, that's what real revenge looks like. Not anger, not exposure, not even confrontation. It's absence. Because silence forces people to face the truth without distraction. It holds up a mirror and says, look at what you did. And look who you lost. Months later, her sister's marriage began to crumble under the same pressure that once made her feel superior money problems, trust issues, embarrassment, and when people asked about the wedding, the bride would change the subject. The story had become a scar. The narrator, on the other hand, started to rebuild. She focused on her work, her independence, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she'd finally taken her power back, not through revenge in the traditional sense, but through something much rarer in difference. Because when you stop needing to be understood by the people who broke you, they lose all their control over you. And that's the part her family never saw coming. They thought silence meant weakness. But in the end, it became her loudest statement. And maybe that's what makes this story so haunting. It's not about cruelty or punishment. It's about reclamation. She didn't destroy their lives out of hate. She simply stopped funding their illusion. And in doing so, she exposed the truth. Sometimes the only way to win is to walk away without saying a single word. But the story doesn't end there. Because as much as silence can free you, it also changes you. And for her, that change wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about evolution. Because here's the truth most people never face. Revenge doesn't heal you. It resets the power, sure, but healing, that comes from rebuilding what they tried to break. And she rebuilt quietly, without sharing every detail, without trying to prove she'd won. Because that's the ultimate irony when you stop needing them to see your success. That's when you've truly moved on. Her family tried reaching out again. Little messages disguised as peace offerings. We miss you. You should come home for dinner. But she knew what that really meant. They didn't miss her. They missed the version of her they could control, the one who stayed quiet, who absorbed the blame, who funded their perfection. But that version of her no longer existed, and you could hear it in her silence. The calm, steady kind of silence that doesn't need to defend itself. The kind that unnerves people because they can't manipulate what they can't reach. Her sister's picture-perfect life began to show cracks online, no more. Glamorous posts, no more captions about dream days, just smaller updates, quieter ones. And her parents? They'd stopped bragging altogether. The shine was gone. And for once, she didn't take joy in it. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Because the best revenge had already happened the moment they realized she was fine without them. They'd built their entire identity around being seen around controlling perception. And she'd destroyed that without saying a word. Because silence forces people to face themselves. There's no one to argue with, no one to blame, no one to twist. Just truth. And when you've lived your whole life performing for approval, truth is terrifying. For her, silence became not a weapon but armor. It was protection. It was peace. It was control on her terms. Because sometimes the loudest revenge isn't public humiliation, it's a life so calm that they can't stand to look at it. They used to call her difficult, but maybe difficult just meant she refused to live small enough to make them comfortable. Maybe difficult meant she saw through the act. And now she didn't need to argue that anymore. Her existence quiet, content, untouchable was proof enough. That's the lesson her story leaves behind. Real revenge isn't about destruction. It's about removal. It's not about making them suffer, it's about making yourself free. Because when you stop chasing closure from people who broke you, you stop giving them the power to do it again. She didn't need apologies. She didn't need them to admit what they'd done. All she needed was distance. And in that distance, she found everything they'd denied her: respect, peace, control, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she didn't have to hate them to be done with them. They built a world where she didn't exist, so she built one where they never could. And that's the real ending, not rage, not chaos, not revenge. Just silence. And peace so loud, it said everything words never could.